Hello, it's Brad Laurie, and on behalf of BlockVera, I'm very honoured to speak with Jimmy Hu today. He is the CEO of Apex. Many know that particular startup from years ago when they began their journey in this very interesting domain called the blockchain. Jimmy, thank you very much for being here to speak with me today.
Hey, Brad.
Thank you very much for all the community support, all of the information and all the input you provided. It's because of you that this interview is happening, and it is for the Apex community. So once again, on behalf of them, I speak for them, through them, directly to you, Jimmy, tonight. Now, Jimmy, I wanted to go straight to this. Today, I don't want to talk a lot about Apex itself. We've talked about that technology at length before, but just for a very quick summary, can you just give us a bit of a recap for those who are new, perhaps, about exactly what Apex stands for and what you're actually trying to do today, 2019, as a leader of the company?
Apex is still a blockchain for B2C applications. Now, in the very beginning, in the first days, that didn't used to be the case. This was announced somewhere in May 2018. Before that, we were actually planning to build a consumer data DApp. But as you remember, starting in May, June 2018, we decided to build our own blockchain. Mm-hmm. And the blockchain currently is in what we call the technical mainnet mode, which means that it hasn't actually done the token swap. But in terms of the technology itself, it's pretty much mainnet ready. That's why it's called the technical mainnet.
Got it. So now, pretty much mainnet, but not yet there. That's important for those who are more tech-centric and tech-savvy.
Well, the only difference is actually bringing the ledger of the CPX holders onto the mainnet itself. And that would just require a hard fork at that particular time of the mainnet that we actually decide is the right time to do. Now, the project itself, the goal is to, as a lot of community members know, as well as certain investors know as well, the goal was to have around 15 DApps by sometime in 2020. Now, having these enterprise apps to get on the chain, to start actually having production level apps running, takes a certain amount of processes that typically starts with a pilot. So the reason why that in our particular application user base, it would need to start with the pilot is really as a result of the target audience. So in certain cases, a startup company doing certain experiments on the blockchain may not require a pilot, a test. It may actually just start developing its so-called applications from the get-go. But for us, the main target audience is basically enterprise companies, and in many of which are not small companies. But so currently there's 4 live and running enterprise pilots. I think 2 of which will go into kind of real application deployment starting sometime in the next year. Now, there's more in the pipeline that's waiting to start the pilot program, but they have not actually started the pilot yet because we're waiting for the other pilots to end so we have enough resources internally to support them.
Got it. Now, firstly, Jimmy, I do apologize to the listeners or viewers, more importantly, for the connection. There does seem to be a bit of a lag at times when you're speaking. But I want to bring it back to the discussion about enterprise for a moment, because that's one of the things, that, if not the thing, that resonates for many of us when we think about CPX, when we think about the value that your startup is bringing to the arena. Now, especially in the context of private chains, can you just elaborate a bit more on the value proposition, the difference between the public chain proposition and the public chain that you've tended to move more towards in the last few years?
The private chain, the so-called private chain that we typically refer to, is just a private version of our public chain. So it more or less uses the same technology, with a couple minor tweaks so that it's that the chain itself is more on a more permission basis, private to enterprise. Now, why the private chain actually exists is because certain of these enterprises, as well as the enterprise pilots, they're not exactly comfortable with their initial applications and certain data points being on the public blockchain, at least not for the initial stage of the use case. Now, that is actually the more prevalent opinion of these enterprises, as we have found out. So the idea is to start them off in a private chain testing or experimentation mode, and then even moving some or all of the applications to the public chain. Of course, that is the goal, but in some cases, we do not see, for certain enterprise users, we do not see the possibility of entirely moving 100% to the public chain, because there's certain areas where they think it works well on the private chain. So we typically have to convince them why certain aspects of their applications being moved to the public chain would be beneficial. And one example is if it involves some kind of asset exchange. For example, if an airline company actually needs to exchange its blockchain-based rewards points with a hotel company or with other third-party consumer company partners, then this type of exchange would be quite difficult in a private chain environment, which would pretty much make the public, or at least the hybrid case, be mandatory.
Right, and that's certainly the feedback coming from the community as well. I have to tell you that many of the questions came forth about their concerns about how things are going to transition more transparently into that public sort of scenario to make sure that you're utilizing the public chain potential, which is really what you started with as a value proposition.
Right. For us, the ultimate adoption of the public chain is the end goal. But in the process, we have to find ways to actually maneuver through the hurdles that would actually prevent the adoption in the first place. So I think there's some misconceptions that the private chain itself is a side product that is a different product in itself, and at the same time building out the user base of the private chain, as well as the technical aspects. It's actually using the project's funds. That's completely not the case. In fact, it's the opposite. So through the pilot programs that we use to actually accelerate these enterprises' adoption, which the end goal is eventually the public chain, we actually generate revenue in the process, and that revenue goes back to the funding of the CPX network project.
Right.
So in some ways, it gives a revenue model as well as a kind of a commercial viability that enables us to extend the runway of the project to rather long. As you've seen, there's projects that started around the same time as us that have died already. There has been no tech development progress. There's no teams anymore. They probably ran out of cash. In this case, we have a variety of different activities on our end that will ensure the longevity of the project. And one of the things that helps that is to have a juncture which helps the ultimate adoption of the public chain, but at the same time makes it more commercially viable.
Right. And Jimmy, I just want to interrupt there because I do want to talk about the revenue with you later, but I want to go through the steps because the community have organized these questions in categories. So I want to focus on that. I hope that's okay. Now, moving back to the idea of adoption, let's talk about company incentives. I wanted to better understand how you're incentivizing integration of startups in the mainstream, for example, to really integrate with either your public or your private chain. The community are really focused on trying to understand how you're going to build up the current scenario we see now and the current conditions of that public chain use.
Excuse me. Yes. So regarding the incentives, there's actually various aspects that I actually want to talk about. Different companies have different incentives of actually adopting this technology. Now, I think at the incentive level, it starts with the use case. Okay. Now, the use case is the most important. The question is, what problems do we actually solve? And this hasn't actually changed, actually. So we still solve problems around consumer data, as well as help companies increase certain aspects of their business, like customer loyalty, et cetera, and increasing the value of stuff like customer loyalty points, et cetera. So that's the first aspect. But lately, we've actually found something interesting that has to do with the larger regulatory environment and kind of government stimulus. So if you remember, around a month or so ago, the president of China released this thing about how blockchain technology was going to be supported.
I remember.
And China's going to push it, actually. This is actually two-faced in a particular way, but purely in terms of blockchain technology adoption, because of the recent view on this, blockchain technology adoption, I'm not talking about crypto, but blockchain technology adoption in itself has become a thing where certain companies feel like they should just go after it. Now, in some of these cases, they may not actually know why or how how they can build apps that actually benefit their business, etc. But because of this, there's kind of a marketing or PR aspect of this as well, that there's companies trying to get into blockchain technology or build the apps because it's in terms of government like incentive, etc. It would actually benefit them as well as PR PR level. So one example is that the major cities in China now have either a standalone blockchain fund that's a government-backed fund, or some kind of blockchain fund mixed with AI funding, right? So some of these traditional companies or these internet companies that have nothing to do with blockchain, now they're trying to get into blockchain and building the apps. In some cases, to get this funding from the local government.
Right. And what's clear
what we're
also
seeing is
there's top-down support.
Right. So how that affects us is that these companies don't have the tech. Okay. They don't have the technical capabilities. They don't have the platform. So they are looking they're looking for solutions like us. And by solution, I actually mean is a team that has a proprietary blockchain technology, a team that has the service capability to get their needs in the blockchain to up and running, and a team that has the ability to provide pilots. Now, this is kind of interesting because this is outside of what used to be our existing enterprise customer base, which consists of 300 plus local and multinational companies, etc. some of these companies are more willing to faster adopt the technology because of very simply saying the governmental level support. So
Right.
we're developing these kinds of partners more now. We're actually shifting a part of the weight off the large enterprises to kind of these mid-sized and smaller startups.
Mm. Well, Jimmy, let's talk about that, because basically what you're saying is that now that there's the green light from the top, you've had the tech for a few years. Companies are now looking to you for support as essentially that tech modem, that tech conduit to their ambition, what they want to do with the blockchain, and not having the skill sets or the team. Now, speaking of that, what's the uptake? What obviously you're alluding to parties coming to the Apex door. How does that then correlate to your business, to your token, to your team?
Right. So how that correlates is hopefully, and we're actually trying to drive this in the way that it's supposed to be. First of all, we are requiring certain levels of applications that require certain resources. Like, for example, over a certain amount of data that's processed through the application, or if it uses special technologies like a sidechain. For these types of applications, not all the applications, but these types of applications, to require to hold a supernode in the Apex network ecosystem. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to do is to have the first wave of private chain pilot users to actually to go ahead and try to adopt something like a supernode. So regardless of their starting point, whether it's the private chain or the public chain, we are trying to have them go out on the public market, mm-hmm. not from us, but out on the public token market to purchase the amount that's needed for a supernode. Now, this may be a challenge for some companies, because this is simply an expense that they cannot be approved internally at a management level. They have software expenses, they have human resource expenses, they have marketing expenses.
But can we talk about, Jimmy, why they would do that, and what are the costs involved in trying to purchase one of those supernodes? And most importantly, coming from the community, they want to know whether or not that is purchased via the exchanges, or whether there's a more direct approach in the way in which they start to play around with this idea of becoming a supernode on your network.
So what we found is that for them to go out there and purchase them by themselves on the exchanges is close to zero. But that does not get done. They're not actually against purchasing the tokens. It's just that format just does not make sense for a business decision maker. So what's more likely going to happen is in certain waves of their next contracts with us, their next commercial contracts for building or deploying certain apps, a portion of the contract will actually include the value that would require them to buy a. So basically, that part of the contract will look like a software contract, but then someone will, on their behalf, someone internally will, on their behalf, use that portion of the proceeds to actually purchase a required amount on the exchange.
I see. And Jimmy, out of respect for those token holders, especially the ones who initially invested in Apex, in CPX, I wanted to find out more about exactly whether there'll be an audit of this, or whether there'll be a record of this, so they can also be part of the traceability process. Being able to track and make sure and verify, most importantly, that there is someone actually doing that final step, as you mentioned, and converting into the token.
Yes. So that would actually, I think it's very possible that when that actually happens, we will actually notify the community. So I think they can use this in certain positive ways, but in some cases, it may not actually be positive. There's certain people that, if they're looking for certain opportunistic chances for this, like lump sum transaction, they may actually go and intercept that kind of transaction, if you know what I mean. So we're thinking about, when that happens, what is the best way or mode to actually communicate and make the process as transparent as possible without stakeholders as a result.
Right, and certainly the community would appreciate that as much as you can make transparent, so they can follow along with how that token's being utilized as a utility. Now, speaking of team before, Jimmy, how is the team going? Because you've shrunk the team substantially since we spoke last. It was 40 plus strong. Assuming the bear market's had an impact, what's going on with the team numbers, and what are the specifics of the roles of the team that that each member are doing?
So previously, when we said 40 something, in reality, it was around 27 or 28 Apex Network team, and the rest were part-time, not on Apex Network's payroll, but on Apex Technologies' payroll, basically working part-time when they're not on other projects or products. So that 27 member team of Apex has now been downsized to around 12, with approximately 3 people from Apex Technologies supporting it once in a while on certain things, mainly surrounding user-specific, like supporting pilots and such. The reason for the downsize was partially because of an entire company downsize. The entire company, if you want to count it as one entity, in the middle of 2019, we had around 140 people. But as you may have read, global economy has not really been so good this year, especially in China, as it has been affected by the U.S.-China trade war, etc.
Especially in crypto.
Especially, well, yes, in crypto as well. So the entire environment, I think, called for a kind of decreasing costs, decreasing unit cost, but kind of increasing the efficiency of the capital that you're spending.
Right. Okay, so basically you had to downsize because of economic and more macro issues. So now that you have Jimmy, what are the prospects for the team? Because obviously, you have a revenue stream. Talk us through that plan. Walk us through exactly what's planned for the growth of the team in concert with the greater vision of the business.
Right. In respect to the team and how that relates to the blockchain side of the business, I would say that, first of all, this current team is really the core team that built up the chain from zero, basically from scratch. So these people, they're incentivized to actually just continue developing the technology and all its capabilities moving forward. They're fully dedicated and as well as like aligned with the team in the long run.
Okay. So how are they paid, Jimmy, your team members? Are they paid in any way in the token? Because some companies do that and they're not transparent about that. Or
they are not paid in the token. They have not been paid any tokens so far.
Right.
They've been paid salaries so far.
Okay. And nothing's been taken out of
the team. It's either paid via salaries through basically the project's funding proceeds, or from revenue that it has generated from private chain pilots. Now, in some cases, employees of Apex Technologies is helping out, then that is not paid by Apex Network by any means.
I see, and it's important you mentioned that, I think, because when the very first time we spoke, it was very clear that I guess you had the support of and pre-existing companies. You know, you having been a CEO multiple times before, you didn't just come into this blind. So you had a lot of capital support as well. But I think that the community, especially those token holders, are looking to try and better understand, you know, those correlations, so that revenue proof as well. So how much revenue have you made since you really started to push forward?
That's a good question. So from the beginning of 2019 till right now, we have made around $1 million off of revenue pertaining to pilots, and you can kind of include the private chains in that category. So it's not large, but considering it actually helps these enterprises go towards ultimately like adoption, and it actually goes towards building the technology. It's something that we're going to do anyway. So generating that revenue is actually good. It's something that it's cash flow that we can get for activities that's helping the ultimate goal.
Right, and then it puts you in a very small number of startups as well right now in 2019, quite sincerely. Not that many are actually making money, even though we don't see satisfactory correlations between utility tokens and revenue. That's just a fact. We don't see that. But the point is you are making revenue, Jimmy, and that does put you in a unique small pool of blockchain and more crypto-related and tokenized startups. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is partnerships, because when we first spoke, it was a time when many companies were riding off the backs of brands. We saw that, you know, that typical FOMO scenario play out in hype more generally. So when we saw things like Tencent, Oracle, AWS, for example, the list goes on, as you know, Microsoft Accelerator and Azure as well, naturally you think at that time, wow, you know, there are some serious players here lined up, linking with Apex. And I'm sure you can appreciate that. Now, the speculation is one of the challenges you face, because you can't account for the increasing price of the token, or of any token, in fact, for that matter. But certainly that fomented a lot of people in. So what's the real nature of partnerships? And are you at all concerned about the misconceptions, perhaps, of people jumping in when they didn't perhaps understand the long-term nature of these partnerships?
Yeah. So there's certain partnerships that were actually quite clear, and we actually explained in detail very early on. Now, these partnerships, it started with Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure Cloud, Oracle Marketing Cloud, and some other larger players like on that list. Now, but what was noted at the time was that these are actually data and infrastructure level partners, that they would provide some layer of the infrastructure or help in the ecosystem. So what I mean is like this. For example, previously, for the past year and a half, the nodes have been running on Microsoft Azure's node service, and they've been providing that free of charge, right? And they've been introducing potential enterprise users as well, because it aligns with their incentives. So I think what they really wanted was to say we use their cloud, and as a part of their cloud, kind of the node service, which at a certain point will start costing because it's not going to be free forever.
Yeah, and we also see them doing that kind of thing. Well, sorry to interrupt, Jimmy, but we do see Azure now coming out and working with other startups as well. We saw that with Engine, for example, experimenting with loyalty systems and token models to really encourage development. So certainly, you know, it's a reciprocal and mutually beneficial scenario here, both for you and for them. But in terms of proof and praxis, how much has evolved since that those initial partnerships that were forged back then to let the community know, let the hodlers know that it has merit, it has meaning, and that there's more empirical proof?
Right. So the idea is like this. So the original idea for these partners, regardless if it's Microsoft Azure Cloud, whether it's AWS, it's to have a cross-sell relationship where they would provide us enterprise users that would use certain capabilities that we have, whether it's AI or blockchain. And they would provide some fees for the management of those nodes. And then basically a part of those fees actually would go back to them, because typically fees for any kind of technology service, whether it's blockchain or AI, typically it's calculated 10% or 15% goes to the cloud provider, which is either or Microsoft. Now, how that's played out so far is that in terms of the blockchain nodes, we've actually migrated off of Microsoft, and they did not actually provide too much help on the ecosystem side. That's just the reality. And Amazon has provided quite a few potential partners, as well as node infrastructure as well. So now we've actually migrated from Microsoft to Amazon, and we're no longer working with Microsoft.
Okay, so it's good to know, though, that they've enabled you to expand and capitalize on, I suppose, their well-established networks to build your own, and most importantly, increase your user base and client base. So you clarified that. Now, with regard to apps, let's discuss the development of applications, where you're at, what are the numbers currently? Because from what I read in the Telegram is that some had felt, who are supporting you, that there was some plans made for more applications that actually didn't happen. So I don't know what that's accurate or not, but it does seem to be that the numbers didn't quite fit with what actually played out.
As I said, there's 4 to 5 currently in pilot mode, and of these 4 to 5, at least 2 are expected to go on public mainnet for a portion or the entirety of their applications. Now, that may actually have fallen short of some people's expectations, that there would be maybe 15, 20 by the end of this year. Right. Now, in reality, that seems just, it just is not actually how it actually played out for a variety of reasons. And one main reason is actually resources. So to support these pilots takes vast resources actually from the team. And we actually thought none of these enterprise users has the internal capability to actually develop and test these pilots. None of them. They rely on our team. So right now, based on the current headcount, it can only support 4 to 5 pilots maximum.
Right. So do you think in that sense, though, Jimmy, to be fair to all of the initial investors, that perhaps the team were a bit ambitious, they were a bit overzealous when it came to projections and perhaps not really understanding the kind of resources that were necessary to build each of these applications? Because certainly the community didn't come up with that number. And obviously not to try and counter what you're saying, but trying to better understand, their sentiment in this context, because obviously they all want you to succeed. They want you to do very well, but they're also naturally concerned that you haven't met those internally driven benchmarks and numbers.
Yes. So we did actually underestimate the difficulty of basically getting uh, pilots and enterprises up and running on the main public blockchain. And we were quite optimistic uh, of how quick these enterprises will actually adopt this technology. I think in part, I think it was kind of fueled in kind of the environment at that time.
Right.
So, in a particular environment, you can understand how everybody was thinking blockchain technology was going to be something that's unstoppable and that was going to rise very fast, both in consumer as well as commercial use. Now, that hasn't been the case for the entire market after 2 years now. Though we are seeing some positive developments, it's just been slower than we actually anticipated, with more hiccups in kind of the entire market.
Well, Jimmy, to be honest, I really appreciate your transparency, mate, because we need that from people like you leading this out, because there's absolutely no reason, obviously, not to be transparent. And if things do change in the roadmap, that you communicate that through to those investors and prospective investors, perhaps, in the utility. Now, one of the things that's interesting, and only people really in your chair, in your seat, can explain to us what's going on in China. But you mentioned pro-blockchain stance. You mentioned that the president is pro-blockchain. But what we're also seeing when we dig deep enough is that they're not necessarily pro-tokenized economies in the crypto context. But we also see that some of us that are doing the research, that there's one particular province that is kind of crypto casino, pro-crypto experimentation at the very least. So I wanted to try and understand from you, what is the situation right now? And are you concerned if, in fact, the tokenized model may fail in China more broadly?
Yes. So this is a very good question that I think will affect a lot of companies and a lot of blockchain projects, even a lot of DApp projects moving forward. Now, the stance is clearly pro-blockchain technology, but anti-crypto.
Okay.
Now, there are several layers to this particular concept of pro-blockchain and anti-crypto. But I think as of now, what we're seeing is that in terms of purely how regulation-wise can really affect a blockchain or crypto company is at the exchange level. These exchanges are getting hit the hardest, and the government has been taking action to have them shut down. Now, there's certain ones that I wouldn't consider anymore, like OKX and Huobi. They're probably, well, there's two sides of the coin. Most of their operations is probably overseas already. They've also kind of made a deal with the Chinese government to be completely under regulation and scrutiny. Now, this is not, this information, not a lot of people globally knows.
Well, I really appreciate you telling us, because I'm really trying to understand for the public which of the exchanges in China have that kind of gentleman's agreement or some of that, back end support, because it does seem to be that some do, Jimmy, and some don't.
Right now, it's only Huobi and OKX.
Okay.
I think they've dug deep enough to come to an agreement with the government, as well as the founders now. I think they sit on some kind of governmental committee.
Well, Jay would be happy that you're telling us this, because
regulation.
obviously, obviously Binance, just if we want to go there for a moment, we saw all of that the block drama. And, I don't want to get into questioning the veracity of any of the sources, that kind of thing, but it was clear that there was something going on. So what are your thoughts on Binance, given that they have such a significant position in the crypto context, forgetting about China, what the West see particularly? But from the inside, when it comes to your position in China, what's playing out there? Do Binance just not have a real strong footing in association with the government there?
Well, I mean, to be honest, their office is not far away from my office, except it doesn't say it's Binance. Eventually, I think there's stories that the office got raided.
Yes.
Although they deny it, no, I think the likely possibility is indeed they did get raided. Now, they're clearly not in the same bracket as Huobi and OKX.
Okay.
But they may not need to be, because vast majority of their user base is now global. Now, they're big enough to the certain extent that they're never that they're going to be around for a long time, and they're going to have ways to bypass whatever strict and stringent large country regulations.
Yeah, well, they've proved that also in the past as well, Jimmy, because they've moved from different countries. But what I wanted to get back to is obviously Apex. Now, one of the things you and I have always talked about is, your entrepreneurial history. You've been known, even in China, for example, as being successful in business. So are you aligned with obviously any of these parties like OKX, for example, or like Huobi, who in the sense of relationships and building capacity or building more towards they understanding your value, because they're not on the books yet with you?
Right. So we actually have conversed with them several times, but on the Huobi side. Now, I think lately, at least in terms of the recent environment, they're not looking to list any more tokens, especially the Chinese ones. So that is something that may need to be waited out.
I see.
But it's a very so back to the topic of regulations. So here's some interesting facts that may actually surprise you. There's over 25,000 token projects in China. 25,000. And some of these, and most of these have been minted, but not all of these have been listed on exchanges.
Right.
So what I've actually heard is, in the light of the recent crackdown on Chinese crypto, what got the hardest were the smaller exchanges. But also, I think there were certain governmental incentives for people to actually report
unquestionable conduct
to the authorities.
That's always a great way to get rid of all of the scamming coins if they're going to incentivize.
Right. So this we've actually sought legal counsel over, because this would effectively be would affect us as well. We have a small but existing Chinese community that it was more of a self-built community, but it's there more or less. But according to legal counsel, so this is good news for blockchain technology projects that have a product and a clear roadmap, and it's clearly not something that's empty.
I think that's the point that you raised.
Yeah.
Given that, firstly, thank you for letting us know just how many startups or token projects have existed in China. I didn't know it was that of that scope and that number. But that would indicate also that many are leaning more towards that crypto casino. And what you're saying is inside, the significant number, there's not every single startup is there for trying to simply just get the money from the people. And naturally, and importantly, the government has to react given this number. Now, what you're saying is that, at the moment, there's scrutiny on you and all of them, but because you have something real, you've built something far beyond, the common narrative of the day of just simply having something to offer that's a token. Do you think that's going to put you in good stead for acceptance, having a token, because you need this token to exist?
Now, according to our hired legal counsel, that is enough, basically, to substantiate that we're a blockchain technology company that has. So that's good. Now there's that I feel we have to be aware of as well, based on case studies. So I'm not sure if you've heard of a Chinese blockchain crypto project called GX Chain.
I've heard of it, but I don't know a lot about it yet.
It used to be listed on Binance, but it's basically a project that the sole premise is business-to-business data transactions. So it's basically data trading and data selling via a blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing is the project has been shut down, and they face legal problems currently because apparently even exchanging some kinds of data on the blockchain were not legal. So actually facing legal problems because of data transactions that violated consumer privacy laws.
Right, and Jimmy, it's no different to the SEC in that sense, is it, mate? Really, because they're cracking down too. And I think a lot of people made the false assumption, very, very inaccurate assumption, that just because something lists on what they deemed as a genuine exchange, somehow deemed it to be legitimate. And that's not necessarily the case. We've seen that evidence play out, that exchange listings don't assert any kind of legitimacy. It's not a given. And so, this story you're saying about this company really proves that, because once again, it's not about which exchange accepts you. It's about you making sure you have that regulatory support, which you're working to do. And it's important you let us know you have that legal team. Now, with going back to Supernodes for a moment, one of the questions from the community was with regard to the 2M CPX Supernodes, in the sense of, once again, going back to enterprise, they wanted to know whether or not the exchanges essentially, as you mentioned, will be involved in any way, even though for the most part that people will be buying through that back-end system. I just want to make sure that that's really clear, because the community really wanted to know exactly whether or not there'd be any tokens exchange in any of the Supernodes scenario.
If I understand you correctly, you're still referring to the question of the enterprise Supernodes. Are they that directly from the exchanges?
Yeah, because I want to make sure I touch on every question they've raised, and they just want to know very specifically, is there any chance of the exchanges also being involved?
Right. The process is typically just they sign some kind of basically software service agreement, and part of the proceeds actually goes to acquiring a Supernode, and then there's someone like either us or a third party that acquires the designated amount listed. Mm-hmm. It may not be actually according to only the minimum threshold. It may be more, but they will go out. Someone will be responsible, not the enterprise user themselves, of going out onto the exchanges and purchasing the tokens through that route, not network itself.
Okay, so who will that entity be? Can you clarify a bit more on that? Who will be that third party?
That's a question that we've been actually thinking, because once you purchase that amount, Then there's also the of say, how will you actually manage the balance, and how will you actually manage the node, and will the party that goes out and purchases it on behalf of the enterprise manage the node as well? I think there's a couple possibilities. I think that party could be a node management provider, which there's quite a few these days of, or it could be just an internal team of us at Apex Network that just helps these users buy and manage these nodes.
I see. Now, Jimmy, one of the things I wanted to find out more of is the roadmap in the hybrid sort of process, because it's very clear you've made money. The private chains, they have been a big source of success and revenue for you. But in terms of the public really seeing more evidence of that hybridization, the utilization of the public, you know, what's to come in terms of revenue in that domain? Because
the idea is this. Okay, so there's public, there's private, and then there's what we call hybrid, which basically works kind of like. So the idea is to so the idea of the hybrid is basically the private aspect of the chain links like a kind of like a side chain to the main public chain. The side chain is deployed in a way that meets the enterprise's expectations, that it's similar enough to their private needs. So that is a scenario in which we think that may actually enable the use of the public chain without actually the enterprise user having to go off the private side. If that becomes kind of a more practical necessity.
So really, there's still a lot of experimentation in this hybridization process. You know, nothing's finite in this planning. One of the tough things, and I needed to ask you, and you may not like this question, Jimmy, is, you know, what would you say to the initial hodler, you know, that initial investor of your token, when they obviously wanted to support you, grow the plan, the vision, and the company, really, given that we look now at price decline? No CEO wants to touch this question, and I respect any way you want to answer, but what would you say to those parties, you know, if they came to your office and said, in terms of why is there such a significant decline in the value of these tokens, despite all of the successes we're talking about tonight, about the revenue, the growth of the private chains, the growth of the interest from the outside, and that pro-blockchain scenario we see, that's not reflected in the performance of your token in any way.
Yeah. So what I would say is this: there's actually a couple elements to the price decline, and I think there's certain parts of the element that's external, which is kind of at macro level. There's certain elements which I think could have been optimized on an internal level. Macro level is, I think, regardless, like a lot of these token projects, regardless of the liquidity that you have, regardless whether you're on Binance or not, you're down more than 80% from March or April 2018. So that, in that particular sense, it's kind of the norm. But at the same time, I think on our side, we haven't been exactly top performers in this particular sense as well.
Definitely not, because, you know, we're talking about I think one of the community members came back and said that the price is roughly 1/50th, and now I don't know if that's accurate, because your all-time high was about 130 million or something.
Yeah. So let me just
market cap.
say this. I think there's two aspects. One is, I think in terms of exchanges, in the early stages that has not gone the way that we actually have preferred it to gone. The exchange negotiations have always been always, there always seems to be a rock stuck in there for whatever reason. And some of the times it's very random. For example, in the case of like initially in terms of KuCoin, et cetera, Bitfinex, et cetera, there were always some problems in the process, whether the listing fee got doubled like suddenly, or they decided for that period of time not to list Chinese projects, et cetera. Also, on another side, I think our choice of market maker has been quite bad. Okay. In fact, we trusted a party that we actually maybe should not have trusted so much. They've done a horrible job in terms of market making. And there has been some cost to that particular
and Jimmy, just to interrupt there, I mean, obviously I speak to a lot of startups, and I'm hearing what you say echo with the sentiment of many CEOs actually, who were engaged with liquidity support or had market making involved, and just didn't do their job as you suggested, and suffered significantly because of that. And even malfeasance, a lot of questionable conduct was even happening in that level. So what forward in terms of engaging with more liquidity support? Because I know it's it's difficult to talk about price because it shouldn't be really the thing that's paramount. But the reality is, if this is driven by the community, they want to know, is this token going to be supported as a utility in the crypto context we see, which is indeed validating the imperative of liquidity, making sure that that's respected as part of the process of building out your point of value. Because otherwise the token just simply will never catch up. It will never correlate because it's not given and afforded the attention it needs by the team. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So basically, very simply speaking, once the pilots start ending, and once the DApps start deploying onto mainnet, we'll see more and more supernodes getting bought, and that would actually support the actual token utility to a quite large an extent. And I think especially towards once the numbers, if you have, say, something like 20 to 30 different DApps, you'll start seeing the token dynamics play out, like start to change.
I see. So really what you're saying here, Jimmy, is wait and see, because you're in that interim period now of building towards mainnet.
But what I actually will say is, regarding stuff like market maker and liquidity provision, we are looking for new partners. And we're also in the process of holding the current one liable and basically having him remit whatever funds are still with the group. So
that's good. So are we talking several million? And are you able to name and shame, or are you not willing to do that so that for reasons of legality?
I would prefer not to name and shame right now, but I think the major, the main community management team, as well as certain close partners and very early stage institutional investors of Apex all know who this is. I think a part of the trust is because some of the early investors did recommend this party.
I see.
At that time, everyone seemed to be very enthusiastic and very confident about doing everything. And people seemed to trust each other at that period of time. But all it was that I think in this kind of particular market climate, I think we kind of we have regrettably not used as much discipline and due diligence and et cetera that we should have.
Got it. So really, you're looking to legally address this head on with that market maker. So good on you for that. And then you're looking also, you're shopping around to make sure that you don't, this doesn't happen again to Apex. And that's important that you are letting us know, because liquidity is important in this situation. Now, Jimmy, what about lockups, mate? When it comes to VCs, for example, I assume they're long gone, but I wanted to check with you, and also the team lockups, so that we don't see more dumping, because I hope you don't mind I say, but it does look like many of the VCs that threw their capital in have now left the building, because they could, in many instances, despite that it actually can be a boon because it distributes that token out for prospective utility.
Yeah. So in terms of team lockups, no team members have gotten any tokens so far.
So when can they, if that's okay if I ask?
In the past, but I have to say, in the past, there were certain partners that were not exactly good actors.
Right.
And they did not actually kind of, so they acted poorly upon receiving.
They basically pooped on you, mate. They basically just wanted to cut the money and left. So do you regret not giving them a longer lockup?
I can kind of say that these have been cut out of the picture.
So in that sense, Jimmy, now you know what's been that tendency for many VCs to capitalize through a privileged lockup, that was negotiated. Do you think that, in hindsight, you would have extended that lockup to reflect the lockup of the team? And on that note, what is the date in which the team can access tokens? And are you looking to postpone that because of the bear market?
You're referring to parties that still have a lockup.
Okay, so talk us through that, because trying to understand, the nature of the VCs, for example, those capital investors, they often have a situation play out where they can leave, they can exit with profit far earlier than even anyone from a team or any of the other ICO investors from the ICO, for example. So
right. I think for the investors, most of them have unlocked since a long time ago, but in terms of communicating with them on, say, not selling or holding tokens, we've actually communicated with as many parties as we can, and in terms of the ones that we truly trust include NEO.
Okay, so NGC,
NEO Council, and NEO Core Development. And I think the ones that would have sold, they have sold already.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
I've actually checked with the exchanges. I've actually checked with LBank. I was able to check. Switchhill, not exactly, but from their CEO, they gave me a list of kind of the parties that have sold however much, like allocation.
So Jimmy, did you have any conversations with these parties? I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall if you'd found out from the transparency of the blockchain that some of these parties that promised to you and your team they were there for the long haul, but the evidence was that they simply were not. Did you follow that up and really let them know what you thought?
I didn't think there was a need.
Okay.
I'd rather not waste my time.
Okay, good point, mate. Now, let's talk more about what is productive, and that's partnerships and that's planning, things that are coming up in terms of really building at Apex. Can you give us a bit of an insight into the projections to moving towards 2020? What's the real meat there, mate, in terms of really showcasing what you guys are come here to do?
I think the meat of it is when we actually see some of these DApps on mainnet come 2020. I think once we see that, it will actually show a level of kind of pragmatic solidness that you don't actually see a lot out there these days that kind of like allows you to actually feel what it actually is. Because blockchain, I think what's hard for a lot of projects is actually actually giving out something tangible that people can actually see and kind of like imagine where it would lead 3, 6, 9 months down the road. And I think before any kind of real applications roll out in production, it's hard to give that kind of confidence.
Okay, so what about the bear? You know, how does that relate to you as well? What are your forecasts, if indeed there are any from you, looking at the overall macro market of crypto, given that there is serious fragility, arguably, even at the Bitcoin level with regard to utility, questions of, you know, manipulation rife throughout crypto, as you know. You know, belief, it plays a huge part in this ecosystem as well, because a lot of it is pre-utility. They're building for it, and not necessarily a lot of evidence for many of these still. So what are your thoughts on the future with regard to the whole macro perspective?
Yes, that's a good question. Now, in one sense, from one perspective, if you look at like Ethereum, and if you look at how many actual real applications it actually has, you don't feel very optimistic about that. But at the same time, you have to remember why we're doing this in the first place is not because that the existing blockchain ecosystem is perfect and all potential users have everything they can ever have placed right in front of them. We are there to create a differentiated solution that I think actually companies are going to use. Now, I think we're going to stick to that. We're going to stick to that vision and value proposition.
Right.
And I guess as well. Yeah.
Got it. Now, mate, let's talk about that in terms of the sort of the pragmatic steps. Are you moving globally? If you are, where's the focus outside of China as you build out, you know, Apex for the world to see?
Yes. So I think globally, I think we've been talking with a couple partners lately, and I think it mostly surrounds the startup ecosystem, because the enterprise ecosystem, it's going to be the same everywhere. Okay, the process, the kind of the long process from pilot to potential like adoption, etc., or even pre-pilots is a process. So I larger like enterprises, it's going to be the same challenges like everywhere. But I think where it's more interesting is that the global startup ecosystem may actually be more scalable to actually grow.
Right. Well, it'll be good to see, you know, more evidence of this play out as you start to, again, have more applications, more offices, and increase your team size as well, perhaps. But the community asked an interesting one. Now, they said, Jimmy, why aren't you more present, you know, in social media, in the Telegram? You know, are you so busy, mate, that you can't drop in more often?
Oh no, that's a good question, and the answer may not be what most people expect. There's a couple other founders in the blockchain ecosystem in China that have shared thoughts with me that for some reason, or they're pointing to certain pieces of evidence that they do not feel that Telegram is safe anymore from the government's
like WeChat
surveillance, but on a privacy level for crypto and blockchain related personnel.
So surveillance is an issue, not having privacy is an issue.
And in fact, in some cases, it may be, okay, so their logic was, if there was some kind of channel for, so that it was not privacy proof, in terms of Telegram, which there were rumors or examples that I was given, not solid like evidence. But if there were actually routes of information getting leaked or whatever, it would be less favorable than even using WeChat, because WeChat, like an environment where it's general purpose, it can be, WeChat's more easily monitorable, but they're not going to put as much emphasis on this large WeChat user pool.
I see. So, Jimmy, just to ask, because the response people would say is, well, what have you got to hide? But is this because of the current position, the opacity that we see, when it comes to the legal stance of China? Is this the reason why you're concerned now? Because they're still working out?
There's a variety of different reasons. And the other reason is also when you're doing OTC transactions. That's also another form, yes, that could be sensitive. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. Now, what about changing the scenario so that you perhaps have a more private platform, such as Discord, or I'm not sure of the other platforms out there?
Actually, I think if so back in the day, I used Telegram for a variety of different use cases, not just for communicating with the community itself. I used it for certain partners, stakeholders, investors, etc., as well as for kind of partners and friends like yourself. But so I think if it's the case that if it's more community interaction with certain updates by myself and etc., I don't think that's a problem for me to pop back in.
Yeah, mate. Well, I'm sure the community, even if it's just very brief, and they'll really appreciate your presence there, because obviously that's coming from them, mate. And even if it's not you, maybe someone from the team, that's not just those admins, because often the case is, Jimmy, not just in your situation, but some of the admins of Telegrams just don't have that rapport or those qualifications when the team, the participants, the members of the Telegram, really have been there from the beginning, and they're just clinging on to life, trying to get information. So we would really appreciate that from you. Now, with regard to this tough situation we see in the future of correlation of value, we've already touched on the issues that many tokens don't correlate between utility and revenue and performance, and you've certainly addressed issues of market making and liquidity. But what, in more of a technological sense, do you think there's an issue with token modeling, just more generally? Because I see that a lot. I see that a lot of the companies perhaps didn't think about their tokenomics or their token structure, so they never really, from the outset, had the potential for correlation from the outset.
Yes. So that's an interesting question, because there's examples and counterexamples. So I think token economics are important, but it's also important that you kind of naturally build that over time, because you need certain applications, you need certain ecosystems, user base, in order for that token ecosystem to work. It doesn't work if it's just a standalone thing with nothing happening within the token economy. Now, I think there's projects that try to design it a little bit too much, and it actually helps them in the beginning, at least. So there's examples in which these projects have these, I don't want to say gimmicky, but certain rather contrived ways of locking up supply of tokens, rather sometimes through apps or templates of apps. So I know this company that developed a token lockup or token ecosystem kind of supply lockup app that kind of encourages people to deposit their tokens and lock it up for like 6 months to a year, so that the market maker can pump the price like 100x or something like that.
Mate, to be honest with you, many of the staking models are doing that, Jimmy. To be honest, you know, sometimes even today, I won't mention the company, but there was one company that's doing staking that has no relevance to the consensus itself and not relevant to the security of the network, quite literally. So sometimes you see not just proof of stake models, but staking systems built into it basically creates FOMO through scarcity modeling. So, you know, harping back to you, how do you sort of redress some of the challenges for your own token model so that we can really just have that confidence that we're going to see an emergence of correlation between utility and token?
Yes. So very simply, I think for us, I don't think we're going to have our token holders lock up any of their tokens. Instead, we're going to rely on real demand through initially bulk supernode purchases.
Got it. So real utility is going to drive this.
Right. Instead of real utility, because using these scarcity models, 90% of the ones that I've seen, they kind of have a peak, kind of a price like action. They eventually fall down to where they started or even lower.
Yes.
Some people benefit in the process. The ones that don't benefit get hurt much more.
It's kind of like the ICO trend, though, to be fair, Jimmy. We see this. I'm seeing it now, certainly. Whether or not we use narratives of DeFi, inside of the narratives that are potentially technologically driven, we see some of these models. And staking can be used in the same way to spike the price up through FOMO and scarcity and all of those things, but it can certainly drop, you know, on a knife's edge, as you alluded to. And we're seeing that right now, mate, where things are doing 4x in a bear market, but likewise, it'll also have the same, you know, response to that success. And often that's, again, not driven by the tech. And I think that's the point you're making. So really, it's back mapping for the future for you, from real use cases, proof of uptake, proof of business through you know, that third party doing the transactions of the token. So it's going to be great to see this happen. Why hasn't it happened yet, though, mate? In the years we've talked, why is it taking you so long to get to that position?
Well, because these applications have not been actually deployed on mainnet.
Yep. Okay. So when is that planned out? Is that 2020?
That would start happening in 2020, yes.
Okay. Now, one of the questions more technologically based was about the desktop client. One of the community members wanted to know about the desktop client staking release before hardware wallets, you know, have, you know, that are adequately supporting that kind of provision. You know, what do you say in response to that? Because obviously I don't understand necessarily all aspects of the planning that you've made for the future.
Desktop wallet will definitely be before hardware wallet.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically kind of how the logic works. You need to have the software, right? So basically, the desktop wallet will kind of actually test how the wallet system and the integration works. And it's kind of an internal develop ourselves to make sure that everything goes fine before any technical integration with any hardware wallet makes sense. Because if that's not safe, or if that's not bug proof or whatever, then it can work very badly. Things can go very badly. The technical
Got it. Now, mate, one of the things that came up a lot was the word accreditation as well, because there's suggestions or allusions to you going after that kind of formal credential of accreditation with the Chinese government. Is that true? And if it is, you know, where are you positioned in the cycle or in the process?
Yes. So that is true. That is true. So we're actually in the process, but I think this is something that Chessmaster knows, but I don't think he's communicated this with a lot of community members. So China, it tends to be the case it's not written in law, but it tends to be the case that a company can get multiple accreditations, but there's some types of accreditations that it's harder to get if you're a certain kind of company. So we're already labeled under big data and artificial intelligence category. In fact, we have the accreditation as well as certain provincial level benefits as a result. But it makes us harder to get a blockchain accreditation using the same entity as a. In some ways, they cannot understand why the company would be in two categories in kind of a concept. So what we're thinking is we are going to register yet another entity in China, a brand new one for the sake of this accreditation for the blockchain.
So really making sure you're jumping through the complex hoops that have been presented.
Oh, yes.
And it sounds like you're not moving to Hainan like so many others, just because there's certain, I guess, preclusions or there's certain benefits to those parties.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly it's much more like Macau in that sense, that it's more supportive of a casino. So that's great to hear. Now, one of the things that was a bit obscure is that, going back to exchanges, Hotbit, for example, has most of the volume, which is bizarre because I'm sure you'd appreciate that's not necessarily an exchange you would engage with. So why is it you haven't had that kind of support yet? You mentioned some of the reasons for price and issues of liquidity and blah, blah, blah. But someone of your caliber and your connections surely, by now would have something that's better than LBank and Hotbit on the books.
Well, I think in terms of that in relation to price and partially some types of liquidity, I think the market making aspect has played a very crucial role in whether or not the liquidity actually gets delivered. Because to be honest, I was actually surprised on the amount of liquidity that was past liquidity that was actually on LBank. So we're talking $5 million per day of pretty much organic volume in the early days. But what surprised me more was some large holders, especially the early dumpers of the institutional investors. That I've only found out recently in the last 3 months after LBank's CEO divulged the details to me. There has been even a party that has offloaded 100 bitcoins of CPX directly, like over time. So that, in that sense, I mean, liquidity was part of the issue, but I think it wasn't exactly poor.
Right. Well, it's going to be great to know when you can announce, better liquidity support to your community, because they're absolutely, supporting you by being there. And one of the questions that came up I thought was really interesting was they wanted to know from you, Jimmy, what you thought of the title, or how would you explain, in simple terms, the nature of the investor from the beginning. Now, they used the word donator, which I thought was interesting because, I've always used the term pre-utility, because you're literally speculating on pre-utility. That's why you participate in an ICO, which is just a crowdsourcing mechanism to get capital for you to build. But they asked this question in the sense of accountability, because they're saying, well, if we gave you the capital to build.
That's a good question. That's a good question. And it depends who you are, actually. But in general, it's just speculator. I mean, if you want to think about it that way, but there are people who made money, and not just the on the institutional level, but not only on the VC level, but there's people who bought in at the ICO that actually did make some kind of money, whether it be 2 to 2.5x or so.
Got it. Well, it looks like
it's hard to put a label on.
Yeah, and it's a difficult question, and I'm sorry to even ask some of these tough ones, but you're doing well, mate. You're surviving. Now, I have a lot of questions on regulation that you have answered, though, touching on things like whether or not you think that China is going to have a more, give the green light, essentially, give a much more open opportunity to parties like you. It seems like you're working well and truly with them on that. You made it clear that there's potentially inroads for certain exchanges, and you're certainly having discussions with them. That's good to know. But what are your thoughts, mate, on just the centralization aspect of, we see the digital currency discussion, movement, interest from China's internal forces, and then we also see they wanting to dominate in this arena globally. So is there a bit of a dichotomy here where it's a you versus them?
Well, it's a funny thing. So around 2 months ago, there was a Chinese TV station that wanted me to actually fly to Beijing and talk about Libra and how it would actually relate to USD dominance and how it would actually affect China. Now, I didn't end up going, but that was actually an interesting. I had a conversation with the reporter, and it was kind of interesting because my stance was like, okay, look, Libra is this would be this large commercial use case crypto in one of the largest commercial ecosystems that's North America based that eventually would stem globally. But Facebook does not actually represent the U.S. government or will not act according to U.S. government interest. But apparently they did not think so. The attitude of the reporter was that I needed to answer the questions from the stance of that how Libra was a threat and how it was actually used to propel further USD dominance using digital.
So now, you were pulled into the crypto courtroom. You were asked to give an account on the West.
That was one of the reasons why I did not go. That was one of the reasons. Well, because I felt like they wanted me to. Well, I don't completely disagree that they should consider that possibility. Though, if I were to answer, I would answer more freely. But anyhow, I think what's more interesting is the aftermath. The aftermath of which happened very quickly. So 1 month after that supposed TV interview, China announced its PBOC's digital currency, which is called DCEP.
Right.
DC. And that was extremely fast. And I think the Chinese government stance is definitely, if there is crypto, then it might as well just be the government's own crypto, or that would be the best version of it and the version that's more ideal, according to them.
Especially, mate, when you see the likes of Facebook in Congress. China would have been watching all of that. With DCEP, they were organising and building that for years, well before the announcement. But you're making the point that they announced it because of that perceived threat, potentially, allegedly. So clearly, the feathers were ruffled. But in your situation, Jimmy, given that you are doing your own startup, it's more just we want to know, your position. Given
right.
Centralized.
In my position, here's how I see it. So the way that they position, so their stance on their own digital currency versus these smaller crypto projects, these blockchain projects, token, is that they would rather there not be these tokens and these blockchain. Well, they want to encourage blockchain projects, but they don't want to encourage the tokens. But the ecosystem use their crypto. But that's actually a side point. Their main purpose is to actually promote the dominance of the RMB as opposed to the US dollar. So I think that's what they're more focused on.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So trying to assume the world power, making sure they're number one is their plan when it comes to
right. So in terms of how it affects me, it's not completely direct.
Okay, and that's good to know, because I just wanted to check with you to see whether that's going to stifle your development. But it sounds like from everything else we're talking about that it's not necessarily going to happen. In fact, if you get these accreditations, I would assume that you have a greater chance of having a better relationship with the government and having better support.
Okay. So I think the government, they have to denounce kind of token projects because of certain malactors in the space. I think it doesn't make any sense for them not to denounce it at an official level. If they promote it at an official level, then there's going to be a lot of scam artists that come out to do these cash grabs, etc. But at the same time, I don't think they're going to go as far as to say that there's no token projects allowed whatsoever in China. Why that's the case is because inherently blockchain and crypto and tokens, you can't say it's two separate things, but in reality it's not. The case is a lot less people are going to go into blockchain if there is no crypto element to it, if there is no token element, or in some case, if you can kind of understand this as the capital element.
Right. Well, as you know, the token itself in your position is the utility fuel. You actually need this for it to flourish, so you can't do it without it. Even though, that's been an issue as well come up from the community. Many of them are concerned that you could, because of the private business you're doing with the private chains and the enterprise and the lack of correlation with revenue to token. All valid points, but we've discussed that at length. And I think that's the thing, is that as you start to make more revenue that we see, most importantly, regardless of the revenue you're building in the private sector, that token starts to prove itself in utility. Now, mate, on that note, media and marketing, we talked about the market maker, but media and marketing are absolutely imperative. We both know from having been here for a few years in getting the attention of the microcosm that is crypto and then building it out. So are you doing anything now that the budget arguably would be lower to push for education, push for awareness of your network, so that you have more reach, you have more people understanding the value of your prospective utility?
Oh, yes. So I think that is mainly through offline events that reach out to potential enterprise users. I think at this point, trying to get more people I think we will try to have a larger user ecosystem first, and to push the project to the next level first before we go out again, like in the past, to get more retail interest.
Yep.
Because retail marketing is a two-sided thing. In the past, it has not been too effective. I mean, at least most channels that we've actually tried. I mean, we've actually spent not so small amounts on kind of marketing channels that were over-promising, but under.
And often they're quite expensive. Like, I'll just help you out here because I know a bit about this. If you're looking at, for example, the influencers of the space, whether they're from China, whether they're from the West, many of them are very expensive. We're talking 5,000, 10,000 on video. You know this, Jimmy. You've seen this play out. Now, the issue here is that often the value is transient when you're talking solely on price points. When it comes, though, to the more long-term issue of educational input, of sustaining the community with updated information, very few of these kinds of parties in the crypto scene ever bother to do that. And they certainly, most of them don't even do free work, because again, it's just for them about supporting for the pay to play and then move on to the next thing because it's so lucrative for them.
Yeah. I think
So how do we change that so that it's
we've had a
long-term
couple.
education?
I think first of all, I wouldn't kind of phrase it long-term as long-term education, because if it required long-term education in order to understand the value, then I think you're doing something wrong.
Well, Jimmy, what I meant, mate, was more long-term vision. So you have people there supporting you along for the long term in terms of updates, in terms of information, in terms of anything that's going to help educate your community about what you're building. Because the influencers, for the most part, they don't care, mate. They do their paid model and move away.
Definitely, I do agree with that. I do agree with that, and I think we should do more of that, actually. And I think we should have more there are certain cases where we released certain in-depth kind of deep dives into aspects of the project, such as the product tech, or say like the pilots. And I think we definitely need more of that. Yeah. So no, there were some community members that were saying on the Chinese community side, why has there not been much promotion or updates?
Yeah, they want that price up. That's why.
Right. And I think the real reason is because it's been suggested to us that at least during this particular sensitive phase, that maybe more is not good. So we kind of toned it down. It kind of goes to our previous conversation about the Chinese regulatory line.
Exactly, mate. And, kudos to you for standing your ground when it comes to qualified information for the community, because it can also be remiss of you just to simply engage in more of that pay-to-play, because it's expensive and it doesn't have sustained effect. It doesn't have a positive outcome because it tends to spike price in a very transient way. So I'll be here for you. This is free. There'll be hopefully other people out there that want to help you out too, mate. So the community get that information out there. And more importantly, what you're doing to expand outside of crypto, that's more important than anything, where you start to educate those who are not engaged in crypto, but more in utility and real use of your token. That's what's going to matter in the future. So hopefully that's where the focus is for expanding the potential of Apex. Now, finally, Jimmy, I just wanted to ask you, mate. Firstly, thank you very much for everything tonight. But what's your position on the future? What's your 2-year, vision in terms of just how the steps forward, things you want to build out? Just give us some reassurance that you're on the right track. Your roadmap is achieving milestones.
I'll just say this. In terms of blockchain technology, I think we've actually set our sights like a long time ago, and we're going to continue investing, developing, and we're going to ensure the continued development, growth, and longevity of Apex network. But in general, in terms of technical capabilities itself and the product itself, we're looking to be one of the leaders in China.
Well, that's a big call. So let's talk about 2020. If you want to be one of the leaders in China, is 2020 going to be a big year for you, mate?
I think it is, because it's going to be a year in which we show what we actually got in terms of what we said was viable. We're going to put it into action.
Got it. And also in that time, you're also addressing some of the very serious liquidity issues, which is going to be part and parcel with all of the things you're doing. But Jimmy, who as the CEO, mate, we could talk for hours about Apex, and I don't think the community would appreciate we do that tonight. But on behalf of all the community, I wanted to say thank you to them, and also, and speak, as a person who, I have not made an investment in this, but I'm certainly invested in supporting startups who are there to be tech-driven for the future. That's why we've talked every time. So it's all about trying to give that community a voice. So thank you to the community members for those questions, and especially thank you to Chessmaster for setting this up. I really do appreciate that, mate. So Jimmy, just one final comment from you. What would you like to say to the community who made this happen?
I think the community has made a lot of good points. And I'm glad we got to address them tonight, and some we will get to address in the upcoming days.
Absolutely.
So we thank all our supporters, and we hope to actually give better quality information as well moving forward.
Well, mate, thank you very much for the time. It was been much longer than you anticipated, I know, but you have survived. And hopefully, mate, we can catch up again to do shorter, sharper pieces about certain aspects of your development as you move into 2020. I'm looking forward to seeing that growth there, especially when it comes to proof of utility. But until then, all the very best with your team, and we'll catch up soon, Jimmy.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, mate. On behalf of BlockVero, this is Brad Laurie signing off, and I'll talk to you soon.